The air inside the high-security research lab hung thick and acrid, a cocktail of burnt polymers, ozone, and something metallic, almost surgical, that had gone terribly wrong. I pushed past the yellow tape, the plastic rasping against my protective suit, and stepped into the devastation. The primary uniformed officer, a burly man whose patience was clearly wearing thin, barely acknowledged my arrival, merely gestured with a gloved hand towards the epicenter. Another accident, Reed, the detective, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit, stated, his voice tight with exhaustion. She stood amidst the wreckage, her own suit pristine, unlike the grimy debris around us. Dr. Aris Thorne. Brilliant, reclusive. Apparently, his genius had a catastrophic misfire. My gaze swept over the scene. The lab, once a gleaming testament to cutting-edge bioengineering, was a ruin. Twisted metal frames, shattered reinforced glass, and scorched containment units formed a chaotic sculpture of destruction. A low hum of emergency ventilation struggled against the lingering stench. Fluorescent lights, half destroyed, flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made the chaos even more unsettling. This wasn't just an explosion, it felt like a surgical strike, aimed at the heart of the facility. Suicide, some are leaning towards, the detective continued, stepping over a collapsed workstation. He was known for pushing boundaries. And, well, the security system was practically impenetrable from the outside. No forced entry. Looks like an internal failure, or a deliberate act by the man himself. I didn't respond, already sifting through the visual data. My eyes moved past the obvious, past the large, dramatic scorch marks and the gaping hole in the ceiling where a primary containment vessel had once stood. I was looking for the whispers, the anomalies that screamed louder than the explosions. Dr. Thorne's remains lay partially obscured under a collapsed console, a grim testament to the blast's force. The heat had been intense, charring the specialized flooring in a wide, irregular pattern. The preliminary report suggests a pressure vessel breach, possibly combined with a volatile reagent spill. A colleague, the lead crime scene technician, chimed in, adjusting the respirator on his face. Standard protocol for handling extreme bioagents, but Thorne was working on something different. Something unstable. I knelt, ignoring the discomfort of the hard, debris-strewn floor pressing against my knees. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me. My attention was drawn to a section of a workbench, miraculously spared from the worst of the blast. It was titanium alloy, designed to withstand extreme conditions, yet a small, precise scorch mark marred its surface. Not a general burn, but a concentrated point, almost like a focused laser. The edges were sharp, defined, inconsistent with the diffuse heat patterns of a general explosion. It was too neat. Did anyone observe unusual activity before the incident? I asked, my voice muffled by my own respirator, my eyes still fixed on the mark. The primary officer grunted. Negative. High security, remember? Only Thorne had clearance for this section after hours. And the external surveillance shows nothing but a power surge and then the blast. I reached out, gloved fingers tracing the perimeter of the scorch. It was barely an inch in diameter, but its intensity spoke volumes. It didn't look like a splash or an errant spark. It looked applied. My internal alarm bells began to chime, a subtle, insistent rhythm against the prevailing narrative. Then I saw it. Almost imperceptible, lodged in a microscopic fissure within the scorch mark, was a shard. It wasn't metal. It wasn't glass from the shattered containment. It was something else entirely. I carefully extracted a sterile microtweezers from my kit, my breath held, and gently plucked the shard. I placed it into a small, labeled evidence bag. This wasn't a product of the blast. The shard was embedded in the scorch, not scattered by it. It suggested a sequence: the focused heat, then the embedding of this foreign material, then the catastrophic explosion. I need a full spectral analysis on this, I stated, holding up the tiny bag for my colleague to see. And an exhaustive search for more fragments like it, especially near the point of ignition. The detective raised an eyebrow, a flicker of renewed interest in her eyes. "What is it, Reed?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, standing slowly, the weight of the evidence already settling on my shoulders. "But this doesn't fit the story of an accidental pressure breach. Or a simple suicide, for that matter. The meticulous chaos of the lab, the sheer force that had ripped through it, had been designed to obliterate. To erase. But the killer, if there was one, had overlooked the microscopic. They had planned for a grand, destructive finale, but they had forgotten that destruction, no matter how absolute, always leaves its signature. And this tiny, iridescent shard was screaming a different tune. I looked around the devastated lab, the air still thick with the smell of ruin. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to stage this. They had known Thorne's work, known the lab's intricacies, and known exactly how to make it all disappear. But they hadn't known me. And they hadn't known how a single, almost invisible detail could unravel their entire, meticulously crafted lie. My mind already began mapping the journey for this minuscule piece of evidence, envisioning its path to the police department basement holding forensic samples, where its secrets would finally be laid bare. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution. And I intended to find out who had pulled the trigger. The sterile chill of the examination room was a stark contrast to the lab's recent inferno. The air, scrubbed clean of smoke and chemicals, now carried the faint, metallic tang of disinfectant and something else, the scent of finality. I stood beside the stainless steel table, my gaze fixed on the remains of Dr. Thorne. The pathologist, a woman with tired eyes and precise movements, gestured with a gloved hand. "Initial findings are complex, Reed," he began, his voice low. "The immediate cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being thrown against a hard surface. But the burn patterns are unusual. Superficial epidermal blistering, yes. Not the deep tissue charring you'd expect from a direct, sustained exposure to a massive thermal event like that explosion." I leaned closer, peering at the mottled skin of Thorne's arm. "So, he wasn't engulfed by the primary blast?" "No," she confirmed, shaking her head. "It looks more like he was exposed to a flash fire, a momentary, intense burst of heat, then impacted. The internal organs, surprisingly, show minimal blast damage. No ruptured eardrums, no significant barotrauma to the lungs. It's almost as if he was shielded, or the force was directed away from him, rather than centered on him." My jaw tightened. Or the explosion was secondary. "A cover-up," he shrugged, peeling back a section of gauze. "That's beyond my purview, Reed. What I can tell you is this: his demise wasn't a clean, singular event. There are microfractures in the skull consistent with a blow before the main impact that caused death. A stunning blow, perhaps. And then there's this. She pointed with a pair of forceps to a minute speck embedded just beneath the skin of Thorne's left forearm, barely visible to the naked eye. It was dark, almost iridescent. We extracted it. It's a microscopic shard of polished obsidian. Not a raw fragment, mind you, but highly refined. And it's not consistent with any material found in his lab, nor is it a common element in this region's geology. Polished obsidian. It was an anomaly, a signature of something utterly out of place. This wasn't a tragic miscalculation. This was deliberate. Someone had been close enough to Thorne to leave this mark, perhaps in a struggle, before the lab became a crucible. The image of the meticulously chaotic lab flashed in my mind, the orchestrated destruction designed to erase. But the killer had forgotten the microscopic. Run it through every database you have, I instructed, my voice sharper than I intended. Anything that uses polished obsidian. Decorative, industrial, specialized tools. Everything. Leaving the examination room, the weight of the new evidence pressed down on me. I called for the initial interview transcripts to be sent to my office. If Thorne hadn't died instantly in an accidental blast, then who was with him? Who had struck him? Back in my cramped office, the air thick with stale coffee and old paper, I sifted through the preliminary statements. The security footage from the lab's periphery had shown only Thorne entering and exiting for days leading up to the incident, an expected pattern for his reclusive work. But the internal cameras, the ones that could have shown an intruder, were obliterated. Convenient. My eyes scanned the notes. 2 names emerged with particular frequency, linked by animosity and opportunity. First, the rival scientist. Dr. Silas Vance. He ran a competing bioengineering division at a different institution, but their paths had crossed frequently in the cutthroat world of grant funding and publication. Thorne's research, on the cusp of a major breakthrough, had reportedly overshadowed Vance's own stalled projects. A colleague's statement read Vance always saw Thorne as arrogant, a showman. There was a particularly heated exchange at the last conference, something about Thorne allegedly poaching Vance's preliminary data for his own theories. Motive, professional jealousy, the threat of being eclipsed by Thorne's groundbreaking work. Then, the former assistant. Maya. She'd worked for Thorne for 3 years before being abruptly dismissed 6 months ago. Her exit interview was terse, citing irreconcilable differences and a breach of proprietary information. Her statement now, however, painted a different picture. He was impossible, she'd told the interviewing officer. Secretive, paranoid. He claimed I was stealing his intellectual property, which was a lie. I just wanted fair credit for my contributions. He ruined my career. Motive, resentment, a desire for revenge, perhaps even a chance to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. Both had plausible reasons to resent Thorne, to want him out of the way. But neither seemed like the type to orchestrate a sophisticated lab explosion. Yet, the obsidian shard suggested something more intimate, a close-quarters confrontation. I pushed away from my desk, the squeak of my chair echoing in the quiet room. The next step was clear. I needed to see that obsidian shard again, under my own microscope, and compare it to any tiny thing we had salvaged from the lab that wasn't immediately identifiable. The concrete walls were painted a dull institutional gray, the air cool and dry. A uniformed officer nodded to me from behind a reinforced counter. "Read. Here for the Thorne evidence? Specifically, the foreign trace element, I confirmed. And any unidentifiable fragments from the lab." He retrieved a small, clear evidence bag containing the obsidian shard, no bigger than a grain of sand, secured within a padded container. He also brought out a tray of other minuscule, unclassified debris from Thorne's lab. Under the powerful magnification of the stereo microscope, the obsidian shard glinted, its surface unnaturally smooth, a testament to deliberate craftsmanship. It wasn't just a natural fragment, it had been shaped, polished. I meticulously examined the tray of lab debris, moving each speck with tweezers, comparing textures, colors, origins. Most were carbonized plastic, pulverized glass, or scorched metal, all consistent with the lab environment. But the obsidian, sitting pristine in its own bag, screamed its difference. It was a fragment of a larger, refined object. An object that had been present during Thorne's final moments. The rival scientist, the former assistant. One of them, or someone else entirely, had brought something alien into Thorne's sanctuary. This wasn't an accident. This was a message, painstakingly hidden, delivered with violent precision. And I intended to read every word. My gloved fingers adjusted the fine focus knob, bringing the obsidian shard into sharp relief. It was smaller than a sesame seed, yet its surface held a story. The forensic technician, a quiet woman with perpetually tired eyes, stood patiently beside me. "Anything, Reed," he murmured, his voice a low hum against the whir of the ventilation system. "Something," I replied, my gaze fixed on the eyepiece. The shard wasn't just smooth, fractured volcanic glass. One edge, no more than a hair's breadth, showed a curious vitrification, a glassy sheen that spoke of extreme, localized heat. It wasn't the uniform scorching I'd expect from a general explosion or a massive fire. This was precise, almost surgical. And embedded within the fractured face of the obsidian, like a tiny, frozen tear, was a microscopic inclusion, a metallic glint, infinitesimally small, yet distinctly out of place. "Run a microspectroscopy on this inclusion," I instructed, pulling back from the scope. "Focus on elemental composition. And check the vitrified edge for any residue, anything that might suggest a directed energy source." She nodded, already moving to prepare the sample. My mind churned. Obsidian isn't common lab material. Its presence, combined with the peculiar burn, amplified the anomaly. It wasn't just a lab accident, it was a scene meticulously engineered to look like one. Hours later, the preliminary report landed on my desk. The metallic inclusion in the obsidian shard was a rare alloy, primarily titanium, and an extremely hard, heat-resistant ceramic composite, typically used in aerospace components or specialized industrial tools, nothing Thorne should have had lying around in a bioengineering lab. The vitrified edge showed trace elements of a high-energy plasma discharge. Directed energy. The words echoed my initial suspicion. I moved from the physical evidence to the digital. Thorne's work was the core of his existence, and undoubtedly, the key to his death. I requested full access to Thorne's research servers and personal computers, specifically targeting his project files related to advanced genetic sequencing. The digital forensics specialist, a young man with quick fingers and an even quicker mind, initiated the extraction process. "It's a fortress, Reed," the specialist reported a few hours later, tapping a series of commands into his console. Layers of proprietary encryption, custom firewalls, but I'm in. Or rather, I'm getting in. He paused, his brow furrowing. Hold on. There's something off here. Multiple failed login attempts from an external IP address, recent, within the last 48 hours. And a significant portion of his primary research drive shows signs of an attempted wipe. A sophisticated one, not just a simple delete. Someone was trying to scrub specific project files, deep-level data. My breath hitched. Were they successful? Partially. I'm recovering fragments now, but it's going to take time to reconstruct. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They bypassed the standard deletion protocols and went for a low-level overwrite, designed to make recovery almost impossible without specialized tools and a lot of patience. He gestured at the screen, displaying a complex web of data logs and partially corrupted file structures. It looks like they were specifically targeting files related to Project Chimera, his big, classified genetic sequencing initiative. Project Chimera. The whispers around the research community suggested it was groundbreaking, either a cure for countless diseases or a bioweapon of unprecedented power. The attempted wipe confirmed its critical importance. This wasn't just a random data breach, it was a targeted assassination of information. Was Thorne trying to hide something, or was an external party trying to steal or destroy his work? The implications were chilling. I needed to speak with Maya, Thorne's assistant, again. Her initial statement had been brief, clinical. I found her in a small interview room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the wall. She looked drawn, as if she hadn't slept in days. Maya, I began, sitting opposite her. I have a few more questions about Dr. Thorne's recent work. Specifically, Project Chimera. He flinched, a subtle tremor running through him. I don't know much about that, Reed. Dr. Thorne kept most of the details to himself. Highly sensitive. Or anyone trying to access it? She hesitated, her gaze darting to the door, then back to me. He was different these last few weeks. Jumpy. He'd pace the lab late into the night, muttering about eyes watching, unseen hands. He increased the lab's security protocols 3 times in a month. He even started carrying a small, encrypted data drive with him everywhere, said it was the only safe place for the real work. Unseen hands? I pressed, leaning forward slightly. Did he elaborate? Did he suspect a specific person or organization? She shook her head, her fingers twisting together. No. Just general paranoia, I thought at the time. He was brilliant, but sometimes eccentric. He said he was close to something monumental. Something that could change everything, he'd say. But also, something dangerous. His voice trailed off, his eyes wide with a fear that felt far too real to be dismissed as mere grief. He seemed terrified, Reed. Truly terrified. The pieces began to click into place. The obsidian, the directed energy, the rare alloy, the targeted data wipe, and now Maya's unsettling remarks about Thorne's paranoia. This was no accident. This was an execution, meticulously planned, and the motive lay buried deep within the heart of Project Chimera. And Maya, I realized, knew more than he was letting on. She wasn't just withdrawn, he was actively holding back, her fear a palpable shield. The question was, who or what was she so afraid of? And was that same entity responsible for Thorne's death? The faint scent of ozone still clung to my jacket, a phantom reminder of Thorne's incinerated lab. The pieces were indeed clicking, but into a puzzle far more intricate and sinister than a mere accident. The directed energy signature, the rare alloy, the targeted data wipe, and the microscopic trace. That trace, invisible to the naked eye, was the linchpin. It was the whisper of the killer's presence, the signature of their method. My hands, usually steady, felt a tremor of anticipation. This wasn't just evidence, it was a conversation starter with the unseen. The lab, now a tableau of destruction, offered no more immediate answers. The real work, the patient, meticulous unraveling, had to begin elsewhere. The drive across the city was a blur of rain-streaked asphalt and muted streetlights. My mind replayed Maya's fragmented memories of Thorne's paranoia, the hushed phone calls, the late-night revisions to his security protocols. He hadn't been delusional, he'd been hunted. And the hunter had left a calling card. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the police department's sublevels, the air growing colder, heavier, with each descending floor. This wasn't the sterile, pristine environment of Thorne's cutting-edge facility. This was the gritty, functional heart of an investigation, where secrets were coaxed from inert matter. The room was a controlled chaos of metal shelving units, each laden with plastic evidence bags, sealed boxes, and specialized containers. The air smelled faintly of chemicals and old paper. A colleague, hunched over a microscope at a workbench, glanced up, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. I didn't need to speak, the intensity in my eyes was enough. I moved to my own station, a sophisticated spectral analysis unit. The machine was a beast of polished chrome and blinking LEDs, designed to dissect matter at its atomic level. I carefully loaded the slide into the sample chamber. The chamber door hissed shut, sealing the minuscule fleck from the outside world. I initiated the scan. The screen flickered to life, displaying a complex array of graphs and numerical readouts. I watched, my breath held, as the laser probe began its work, a silent, invisible ballet of light and energy. The machine hummed, a low, steady thrum against the quiet of the basement. On the primary monitor, a jagged peak materialized, a unique signature against the spectral baseline. It was distinct, unlike anything I'd seen in a typical lab accident profile. I cross-referenced the signature against the vast industrial material database. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, a match. Not a perfect one, but a strong correlation. The system flagged it, a rare, synthetic polymer. This wasn't some common plastic or a byproduct of combustion. This was a specialized composite, engineered for extreme durability and heat resistance, typically used in high-end industrial applications, aerospace, advanced robotics, precision manufacturing. My internal clock reset. This wasn't just about Thorne's research anymore. This polymer pointed to a specific manufacturing process, a specialized supply chain. It wasn't something you'd find lying around. It was manufactured, designed, and deployed with intent. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a lone wolf operating out of a garage. This implied corporate backing, industrial resources. Thorne had multiple funding sources, but one name always rose to the top: Omnicorp. A conglomerate with tentacles in everything from consumer electronics to advanced defense systems, and a history of aggressive R&D acquisition. They had been Thorne's primary investor for Project CH, whatever it was. I made the call. Getting through to Omnicorp was a bureaucratic maze, but the mention of a homicide investigation involving one of their funded researchers cleared the path with surprising speed. Within the hour, I had an appointment with their official liaison. The Omnicorp regional office was a glass and steel monument to corporate power, all sleek lines and muted tones. The lobby was hushed, the air conditioned to a precise, almost sterile, temperature. The liaison, a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, met me at the elevator bank. His name escaped me, but his role was clear: damage control. "Read," he said, extending a hand that was firm, almost aggressively so. His smile was a little too wide, a little too practiced, revealing teeth that were unnaturally white. "Thank you for coming. We're, of course, deeply saddened by Dr. Thorne's tragic passing. A brilliant mind." I kept my expression neutral. "My condolences. I'm here regarding the investigation into his death." He led me into a sparse conference room, all polished wood and cold glass. He offered me coffee, then water, then a detailed, unsolicited history of Omnicorp's philanthropic endeavors before I even asked my first question about Thorne. He was a master of misdirection, a verbal magician. "We were deeply invested in Dr. Thorne's work," the liaison continued, gesturing expansively with a manicured hand. "Project Chimera, as he called it, held immense promise. We provided all necessary funding, equipment, security. Dr. Thorne had specific requirements. Our procurement department is highly efficient. Anything he needed, we sourced. I'm interested in a specific synthetic polymer," I said, watching him closely. "Rare, high-end industrial application. You'd know it if you saw it. Used for extreme heat and durability." He paused, a beat too long. "Ah, yes. We do work with a variety of advanced composites. Our R&D division has several patents in that area. Could you be more specific?" His tone was overly cooperative, almost eager, yet his eyes remained guarded. "Thorne with such a material, or if you have any knowledge of its use in his lab. I'll have our records department pull everything related to materials supplied to Dr. Thorne's facility," he said, his voice smooth, almost too eager to please. "We have nothing to hide, Reed. Omnicorp values transparency above all else. We want to assist your investigation in any way we can." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Nothing to hide. It was the classic refrain of someone with everything to conceal. His eagerness to cooperate felt less like genuine assistance and more like a preemptive strike, an attempt to control the narrative before I could even begin to uncover it. This was no longer just about Thorne, it was about the colossal entity that had funded his final, fatal project. The web was far larger, and far more dangerous, than I had initially imagined. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pallid glow on the rows of evidence lockers and the analytical equipment I now occupied. I'd been at it for hours, the polymer fragment from Thorne's lab a stubborn puzzle piece refusing to fit. But I was getting closer. My determination wasn't just a professional obligation, it was a personal one now. The feeling of being watched, that subtle shift in the air, hadn't dissipated since my last conversation with the corporate liaison. I fed the minuscule polymer sample into the pyrolysis GC/MS, the machine whirring softly as it broke down the material into its constituent compounds. The initial scans had been inconclusive, pointing to a proprietary blend, but my deeper dive into obscure patent databases and specialized industrial forums was starting to yield fruit. I cross-referenced spectral data with known industrial polymers, filtering out common variants, narrowing the field. The screen glowed, displaying complex chromatograms. A specific peak, minor but distinct, caught my eye. It was characteristic of a very niche, high-performance thermoplastic, often used in aerospace composites or, more intriguingly, in advanced insulation for high-temperature applications. It wasn't something you'd find in standard lab equipment, and certainly not something that would accidentally combust in the way Thorne's lab had. This wasn't a standard lab fire. This was engineered. I noted the manufacturer, a relatively small, specialized firm with a global footprint but a highly controlled distribution network. Getting a sample for comparative analysis wouldn't be simple. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up their product catalog, searching for formulations that matched the trace elements I'd identified. This was it. This was the thread. It was well past midnight when I finally packed up, the city outside a quiet hum. My mind, however, was anything but quiet. The polymer, the burn patterns, the corporate liaison's thinly veiled dismissiveness, it all coalesced into a growing certainty. This wasn't an accident. And someone wanted it to stay that way. I drove my beat-up sedan through the deserted streets, the rhythmic sweep of the wipers a monotonous companion to my thoughts. The data from the basement lab replayed in my head, each chemical signature a silent scream. The massive rig, appearing from seemingly nowhere, veered sharply into my lane, its headlights blinding, its bulk filling my rearview mirror. I instinctively swerved, tires squealing against the wet asphalt, narrowly avoiding a collision with the guardrail. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. The truck, without slowing, corrected its course and rumbled past, disappearing into the night. A simple lapse in attention, or something more? The road had been empty, the truck's maneuver unusually aggressive for an otherwise clear stretch of highway. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. A chill, unrelated to the damp night air, snaked down my spine. The determination solidified into something colder, sharper. I pulled into the parking lot of my private workshop, a small, nondescript unit tucked away in an industrial park. It was where I kept my specialized equipment, away from prying eyes and bureaucratic red tape. The security system chirped its usual all clear as I disarmed it. But as I pushed open the heavy steel door, a faint, unfamiliar scent prickled my nostrils. Not smoke, not anything overtly destructive, but a metallic tang, almost like ozone, overlaid with a faint, sweet chemical note I couldn't immediately place. My eyes scanned the room. Everything appeared to be in order. The microscopes were covered, the chromatography columns neatly stored. But then I saw it. My personal toolkit, usually meticulously arranged, had a single screwdriver lying slightly askew, not quite in its designated slot. It was a minuscule detail, something only I, with my obsessive need for order, would ever notice. And on the surface of my workbench, where I kept a small, sealed bag of specific reagent powders, the faint outline of a finger smudge. Not mine. I always wore gloves. Someone had been here. They weren't just trying to slow me down, they were actively looking for something, or sending a message. My lab, my sanctuary, had been breached. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was Maya. Her name flashed on the screen, an unexpected beacon in the escalating tension. I answered, my voice taut. Read. I was so scared. After what happened to Thorne. And now, things are happening. My jaw tightened. What kind of things, Maya? Someone was watching my apartment. I saw them twice, and then. A few weeks before Thorne died, I saw someone else. Not Thorne. Not any of the usual team. They were at the lab, late at night. I was just leaving, I'd forgotten my bag. The security guard was gone, and the main door was propped open. It was Tal. I thought it was just the cleaning crew at first, but they were never there that late, and they always used the service entrance. This person was different. They didn't seem to want to be seen. Her voice broke, a small, choked sob escaping. I didn't tell anyone. I thought it was nothing. Just some late-night work. But now, with what you're saying about it not being an accident. The polymer, the breach, the near miss, and now Maya's terrified confession. An unknown individual, accessing the lab after hours, weeks before Thorne's death. This wasn't just about the polymer anymore. This was about a calculated, methodical operation. And I was directly in the crosshairs. My coffee, long forgotten, sat beside a stack of printouts detailing environmental control parameters and security access records. Weeks of data, compressed and encrypted, unfolded before me. I started with the obvious, the moment of the incident. The system logs for that precise second were clean, almost too clean. No alarms, no error messages, just a sudden, catastrophic cascade of failures that mimicked a system overload. That was my first red flag. Real failures left digital fingerprints, stuttering entries, fragmented data. This was a clean cut. I rewound the timeline, moving backward hour by hour, then day by day. Thorne's lab was a fortress of bespoke systems, custom-built for his unique research. Every pressure valve, every atmospheric sensor, every gas flow regulator was tied into a central control network. It was designed for precision, not for vulnerability. Then I found it. A flicker. Not an error, but an override. 3 weeks prior to Thorne's death, precisely when the colleague mentioned the unauthorized access, there was a brief, almost imperceptible manual override of the main atmospheric regulator. It lasted less than a second, too short to trigger any alarms, too subtle to register as a system fault. But it was there, buried deep in a tertiary log file that few would ever check. A ghost in the machine. My breath hitched. This wasn't a random hack. This was someone who knew the system intimately, someone who understood its blind spots, its redundant checks, and precisely where to make a change that would go unnoticed until it was too late. I traced the override. It wasn't an external IP. It was an internal command, masked to appear as a routine system self-check. I leaned closer, my eyes straining. The override had temporarily disabled a specific safety protocol tied to the lab's primary inert gas supply. A minor adjustment, easily reversed, but it left a tiny window. A seed planted. I started correlating this with the physical evidence I'd collected. The unusual burn patterns, the polymer residue that suggested a rapid, intense thermal event, the very specific way the reactor vessel had ruptured. None of it made sense as a simple accident. But now, with the digital breadcrumbs, a horrifying sequence began to form in my mind. I pulled up the schematics of Thorne's reactor, overlaying them with the environmental control logs. The inert gas, usually pumped in at a precise pressure to prevent oxidation during specific reaction phases, had been slightly, imperceptibly, altered. Not a massive change, but enough to create a latent instability. A pressure differential that would only manifest under specific, high-stress conditions. My gaze drifted to the environmental controls for temperature and humidity. Again, subtle anomalies. Not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to push the system parameters to their very edge, creating a volatile environment. This wasn't an accident. This was a symphony of calculated chaos. I visualized the final moments in the lab. Thorne, immersed in his work, oblivious. The systems, operating just outside their safe parameters, like a coiled spring. Then, the trigger. I found it in the logs, a remote activation command for a secondary heating coil, perfectly timed with a sudden, controlled drop in the main ventilation system's efficiency. The secondary heating coil, activated remotely, would have raised the internal temperature of the reactor just enough. The compromised inert gas supply, coupled with the subtle pressure differential, would have then reacted catastrophically to this temperature spike. The ventilation drop would have allowed the rapid buildup of volatile gases, ensuring the explosion was contained, maximizing its destructive force, and masking the true cause. It was a multi-stage manipulation, a carefully choreographed dance of digital commands and physical reactions. First, the subtle compromise of the inert gas safety protocol weeks prior. Then, on the day of the incident, the precise remote triggering of the heating coil and the suppression of ventilation. The result, a lab incident that looked like a tragic malfunction, but was, in fact, a perfectly executed assassination. My hands clenched into fists on the desk. This wasn't about a botched experiment. This was about a killer who didn't just understand Thorne's research, but understood the intricate, bespoke systems designed to protect it. Someone with the access, the knowledge, and the cold, calculating precision to turn a state-of-the-art lab into a meticulously designed death trap. The colleague's terrified confession about an unknown individual accessing the lab after hours, weeks before Thorne's death, now echoed with chilling clarity. That wasn't just access, it was reconnaissance, the planting of the first fatal seed. The tension in the room, previously just a hum, now felt like a taut wire stretching from my chest to the glowing screens. The perpetrator wasn't just smart, they were a ghost, moving through the digital and physical spaces of Thorne's life with an invisible touch. Days had bled into nights in this subterranean vault, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an obstinate refusal to accept the official narrative. The initial findings, the reports whispered, painted a picture of either a brilliant mind's tragic miscalculation or a desperate final act. But my meticulous eye had caught the subtle contradictions, the microscopic trace of an unusual accelerant beneath a workstation, the peculiar, almost controlled burn pattern on a specific piece of equipment, not indicative of an uncontrolled explosion. These details gnawed at me, stubborn burrs under my skin. A simple theft of research wouldn't require such an elaborate, destructive stage. If someone wanted Thorne's work, they'd lift the data and vanish, leaving the lab intact for future use, or at least a less conspicuous mess. No, this wasn't about acquisition, it was about annihilation. I scrolled through lines of routine system diagnostics, firewall alerts, and access logs. Everything appeared meticulously normal, a digital facade of a well-ordered system. Too normal, perhaps. There was a brief, almost imperceptible spike in CPU usage, an anomaly that resolved itself too quickly to trigger any automated alarm. It didn't correspond to a scheduled backup, a system update, or any known lab process. It was a phantom blip, a flicker in the vast digital ocean. "What are you hiding, Thorne?" I muttered, leaning closer to the screen, my breath fogging the cool glass. I started correlating the phantom spike with data fragments in the temporary memory caches. Most were corrupted, digital debris from the system's frantic shutdown. But one small block, isolated and strangely intact, stood out. It was a data packet, unusually small, but its header indicated a highly encrypted payload. It wasn't part of the lab's main research database, nor was it linked to any of Thorne's publicly accessible project files. This was something distinct, something buried. The first few attempts failed, the system spitting back error messages with dismissive efficiency. This wasn't a standard corporate encryption. It was bespoke, complex, layered. A wave of frustration threatened to pull me under, but I pushed back, picturing the meticulous burn patterns, the precise violence of the scene. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase Thorne, and I was going to find out why. I switched tactics, focusing on Thorne's personal digital habits, cross-referencing keywords from his email drafts and calendar entries. He was a creature of habit, even in his digital life. Eventually, a pattern emerged, a sequence of seemingly random numbers and symbols that recurred in his personal notes, always associated with a specific date, his mother's birthday, the anniversary of his first patent, the day he joined Omnicorp. It was a digital breadcrumb trail, hidden in plain sight. The decryption program churned, its progress bar crawling forward with agonizing slowness. The server hum intensified, a low growl of anticipation. When the final percentage clicked over, a new window snapped open, revealing a text file. It wasn't a research paper. It was a personal log, dated just weeks before his death, titled, "Ethical Concerns, Project Chimera." I began to read, the words on the screen pulling me deeper into Thorne's tormented final days. My work on cellular regeneration, intended for restorative medicine, has been twisted. Omnicorp's clandestine funding for Project Chimera is no longer about healing. Their internal memos, which I've painstakingly recovered, detail a far more sinister application: weaponization. They are not merely interested in the data for competitive advantage, they intend to use my discoveries to create a highly aggressive, self-replicating biological agent. A clean slate, they called it. A way to reset populations, to control resources on an unprecedented scale. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just about profits, it was about power, control, and a terrifying disregard for human life. I cannot allow this to proceed. My conscience demands action. I've begun compiling an exposé, detailing Omnicorp's involvement, their hidden labs, and the true, devastating potential of Project Chimera. I will release it to the global scientific community, to the press, to anyone who will listen. They must be stopped. I know the risks. They will come for me. But the world needs to know. The entry ended abruptly. There was no follow-up, no indication of where he might have stored the compiled exposé, or if he'd even managed to complete it. The complexity of the murder method, the intricate cover-up, the subtle destruction of specific lab equipment, it all clicked into place. The killer hadn't merely wanted Thorne's research, they wanted to silence him, to prevent the public release of his exposé, to bury the truth about Project Chimera before it could shatter Omnicorp's carefully constructed empire. Thorne wasn't just a victim of an accident, he was a martyr, killed to keep a catastrophic secret. And I, unknowingly, had stepped into the crosshairs of something far larger, far more dangerous than a simple corporate rivalry. It was late, past the shift change, and the fluorescent lights cast a stark, unforgiving glow on the rows of evidence lockers. My laptop screen was the brightest thing in the room, its blue-white light illuminating the meticulous grid of data I'd spent the last 12 hours compiling. Aris Thorne's lab wasn't just a high-security facility, it was a fortress designed to keep secrets in, not out. The sabotage, however, had been executed with surgical precision, bypassing layers of protocols and redundant systems. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was an internal job, requiring an intimate knowledge of the lab's architecture, its failsafes, and Aris Thorne's specific research methodologies. The killer hadn't just gotten in, they'd known exactly where to strike. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic squeaking faintly. My eyes burned, but the data on the screen demanded my full attention. I had cross-referenced the digital access logs, door swipes, system logins, server pings, against the physical entry records for the past 6 months. Then, I overlaid that with employee profiles, focusing on those with the specific technical certifications and clearances required to even understand Thorne's work, let alone dismantle it. The initial list had been long, too long. Every researcher, every technician, every maintenance worker with level 3 clearance was a potential candidate. But the nature of the sabotage, the specific sequence of events that led to the accident, narrowed the field considerably. This wasn't just about presence, it was about capability. It required expertise in molecular biology, advanced materials science, and a deep understanding of the lab's proprietary environmental controls. I ran a new filter: individuals with a verifiable background in advanced bioengineering or chemical process management, coupled with security systems integration experience. The list shrank from dozens to a handful. 4 names. For individuals who possessed the unique blend of knowledge that could turn Thorne's groundbreaking research into a fatal trap. One name kept snagging my attention: David Thorne, the Omnicorp liaison. He wasn't a direct employee of Aris Thorne's lab, but his role gave him unparalleled access. He was the corporate bridge, the one who facilitated resource allocation, project reviews, and the occasional, or so the records claimed, system audit. His profile was extensive, almost too extensive, a meticulously curated document of professional achievements. I pulled up his complete background, digging past the corporate gloss. Omnicorp, like many conglomerates, had a history of acquiring smaller firms, integrating their talent. David Thorne had joined Omnicorp 5 years ago, after a stint with a private security consultancy. That detail alone raised an eyebrow. Why would a bioengineering liaison come from a background in security? It wasn't unheard of, but it was unusual. Most were standard corporate espionage prevention, data protection, competitive intelligence. But then I found it. A series of redacted reports from nearly a decade ago, detailing a high-profile case involving industrial espionage and the theft of intellectual property from a rival research facility. The details were scarce, but the timeline matched David Thorne's tenure at the security firm. He wasn't just involved, he had been the lead investigator on the ground, a key operative in recovering the stolen data. My breath hitched. Covert operations. It wasn't just a security background, it was a clandestine one. This wasn't about protecting data, it was about understanding how to acquire it, how to subvert systems, how to operate in the shadows. The meticulousness of Aris Thorne's murder, the way it had been disguised as an accident, suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just about technical skill, it was about a mindset. A mind trained in deception, in making complex operations appear seamless and natural. I scrolled further, digging into the public records surrounding that old scandal. The rival facility had been on the verge of a major breakthrough in synthetic biology, a field remarkably similar to Aris Thorne's own area of expertise. The stolen intellectual property had been recovered, but the lead perpetrator, a disgruntled former researcher, had vanished without a trace. The scandal had been a black mark on the industry, a stark reminder of the cutthroat competition for innovation. And David Thorne, the Omnicorp liaison, had been at the heart of it. Not just as a corporate overseer, but as an active participant in the covert world of industrial espionage. He understood the value of stolen research, the mechanics of its appropriation, and crucially, the art of covering tracks. A cold certainty settled in my gut. The complexity of the murder method, the intricate layering of misdirection, it wasn't just knowledge, it was a skill set. David Thorne wasn't just a name on a list anymore. The tension in the quiet room coiled tighter, a silent alarm bell ringing in my ears. My laptop screen was the brightest thing in the room, reflecting my own drawn face. I'd been here for hours, meticulously crafting the bait. My fingers hovered over the send key. The email, disguised as a preliminary internal report, detailed a supposed breakthrough. Unexpected stability achieved in Compound X, it read, contradicting previous volatility assessments. Project Chimera implications under urgent review. It was a lie, of course. Aris Thorne's research, particularly the compound at the heart of the supposed accident, was dangerously unstable. Its volatility was the cornerstone of the killer's elaborate deception. If I could make them believe we'd found a way to stabilize it, to understand it, they'd panic. They'd think their perfect crime was unraveling. Only someone intimately familiar with Thorne's work, and the true nature of Compound X, would grasp the profound threat this false lead posed to their carefully constructed narrative. I hit send, routing the email through a compromised internal Omnicorp server I'd been monitoring. It would look like a data leak, just enough to catch the eye of the man I suspected. Then, I leaned back, the plastic chair groaning under my weight. The waiting began. I didn't have to wait long. 2 hours later, just as the first faint hint of pre-dawn gray was bleeding into the city skyline above, the security alert chimed softly on my hidden wrist communicator. Motion detected in Sector Gamma, the section holding Aris Thorne's lab samples. My heart didn't pound, it tightened, a cold, focused knot. I moved silently, slipping between the towering racks of evidence, my hand already on the grip of my service weapon, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. The figure was already there, a dark silhouette against the glow of a nearby server bank, fumbling with the lock on Aris Thorne's evidence locker. The corporate representative, Aris's own brother, David Thorne. Thorne? My voice cut through the quiet, flat and devoid of emotion. He froze, his hand still on the locker door. His head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. I just came to check on my brother's things. Personal items, you know. They wouldn't release them. He gestured vaguely at the rows of sealed bags and containers. Personal items are handled through official channels, Mr. Thorne, I countered, stepping fully into the aisle, letting him see the glint of my badge. And they're not stored in evidence lockers in Sector Gamma. This section contains the core samples from Aris Thorne's lab. The ones related to Compound X. His jaw worked, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. Compound X? I'm just a corporate liaison, not a scientist. That's where your story unravels, I said, my gaze unwavering. The email I sent out, the one about the unexpected stability of Compound X? You understood its significance immediately, didn't you? Enough to risk breaking into a secure police facility in the dead of night. I took another step closer, the scent of antiseptic and old paper filling the air. Because you knew that Compound was supposed to remain unstable. That its uncontrolled reaction was the perfect cover for murder. He backed away, bumping into a metal rack, sending a faint rattle through the shelves. Murder? You're insane. It was an accident. A tragic accident. Was it? I reached into my evidence kit, pulling out a clear, sealed bag. Thorne. Designed for high-stress, high-temperature applications. It's a very specific, experimental material. We found traces of it in Aris Thorne's lab. On the control panel that supposedly malfunctioned. And we found more of it. I produced another bag, this one containing a small, singed piece of fabric. This was recovered from the undercarriage of my personal vehicle, after a rather unfortunate brake line failure. And another trace, from the small fire that started in my apartment building's utility closet last week. The same polymer, Mr. The same signature. A signature that matches the one found on a pair of gloves we recovered from your office waste bin, despite your attempts to destroy them. His face went ashen. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The air thickened with unspoken truths. You can't prove any of that, he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. I can, I stated simply. The unique molecular structure, the specific degradation pattern. It's a match. You knew I was getting too close. Too close to the truth about Compound X, and too close to the truth about your brother's actual work. He slumped against the locker, his shoulders heaving. He discovered what they were really doing with Project Chimera. It wasn't just advanced bioengineering. It was weaponized. A pathogen, designed for specific genetic targeting. He couldn't live with it. He said he was going to blow the whistle, release everything. My grip on the evidence bags tightened. Omnicorp, I supplied, connecting the dots. He nodded miserably. A faction within. Powerful people. They tasked me. Said I had to neutralize him. Make it look like an accident. If I didn't, they'd make sure I disappeared too. And my family. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. I didn't want to read. He was my brother. But they left me no choice. Aris Thorne hadn't died in a tragic accident. And his own brother had pulled the trigger, albeit under duress. The pieces clicked into place, forming a grim, complete picture. The hunt for the killer was over. Now, the real hunt began. The words themselves had been clipped, devoid of remorse, yet they detonated like a silent bomb, scattering the last vestiges of doubt about Aris Thorne's demise. I watched David Thorne, his face a mask of calculated defiance, being escorted from the interrogation room. His eyes, cold and sharp, flicked towards me for a split second, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Triumph? Resignation? It vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the grim corridor. My breath felt shallow. Aris Thorne wasn't a victim of a tragic lab accident, nor a desperate man taking his own life. He was a sacrifice, offered up on the altar of corporate greed, his groundbreaking research the prize. The senior investigator, a woman with tired eyes and a jaw set like granite, approached me. Good work, Reed, he said, his voice low. The warrant for Omnicorp's executive offices just went through. We're moving fast. Fast isn't going to be fast enough for them, I murmured, my gaze still fixed on the empty doorway David Thorne had passed through. They've had a head start. True. The net is wider than you think. She gave a curt nod before disappearing to orchestrate the next phase. My phone, which had been buzzing intermittently for the past hour, now vibrated with a relentless urgency. I ignored it. I needed a moment to process. The microscopic burn pattern, the unusual residue, tiny threads that had led me through a labyrinth of corporate secrecy and familial betrayal. Now, the full tapestry was unfurling, uglier than I'd imagined. The next few hours blurred into a whirlwind of activity. The quiet hum of the basement gave way to a frantic energy. Phones rang off the hook. Colleagues rushed past, their faces grim, clutching files brimming with new evidence. The initial arrest of David Thorne was merely the first domino. Within Omnicorp, a vast network of complicity began to collapse. Early reports, whispered and then shouted, spoke of multiple high-profile executives being detained, their names now flashing across news feeds that flickered silently on the breakroom television. The shattered containment unit, the melted circuit boards, the twisted metal fragments, each piece now told a different story. Not of an accident, but of a deliberate, violent act designed to look like one. They hadn't just wanted the research, they wanted it without Aris Thorne's ethical oversight, without his moral compass. The media firestorm erupted with an intensity one hadn't anticipated. Television screens in every public space blared headlines about corporate espionage, scientific betrayal, and the Omnicorp scandal. News anchors, their voices grave, dissected every detail, from Aris Thorne's reclusive genius to the ruthless ambition of his brother. Public shock rippled through the city, then the nation. I found myself fielding calls from reporters, PR agents, and even a few academics, all desperate for an angle, a quote, a confirmation. My answers were clipped, professional, revealing nothing beyond what was officially released. But internally, the questions churned. The case had morphed from a simple murder investigation into something far grander, touching on the very ethical fabric of scientific advancement and corporate responsibility. Aris Thorne's research, once a closely guarded secret, was now the subject of intense global scrutiny. Governments, international organizations, rival corporations, they all circled, vultures eyeing the carcass of Omnicorp's reputation, but more importantly, the immense potential of Thorne's final project. The implications were staggering. His work promised breakthroughs that could reshape industries, cure diseases, perhaps even alter the course of human longevity. Such power, left unchecked, was a terrifying prospect. A senior official from a government oversight committee arrived later that day, flanked by two stern-faced security personnel. He spoke directly to the chief investigator, but his words carried across the room, deliberate and heavy. The data, the prototypes, everything related to Dr. Thorne's Project Chimera. It needs to be secured under federal jurisdiction immediately. The implications are too vast for it to remain in limbo. I watched him, a knot tightening in my stomach. The very thing Aris Thorne had died protecting was now a prize, a weapon, a bargaining chip in a game far beyond my purview. My role had been to uncover the truth of his death, to bring his killer to justice. But the truth, once exposed, had a way of expanding, revealing layers of consequence that dwarfed the initial crime. The tension in the basement was no longer just about solving a murder, it was about containing a potential global upheaval. The future of Aris Thorne's research, a legacy born of genius and shattered by avarice, hung precariously in the balance, a dangerous beacon in a world suddenly awakened to its existence. My determination remained, but it was now laced with a profound unease. The immediate fallout was just beginning. Resignation? I stood before the evidence locker, its metal door a dull gray, reflecting the fluorescent lights in an uninspired sheen. Inside, secured and labeled, lay the last physical remnants of Aris Thorne's life, and the brutal end of it. The shattered glass from his lab, carefully collected microfragments of specialized polymers, the scorched remnants of his experimental apparatus, all of it now just inert objects, their stories told. I ran a hand over the cool steel, a phantom ache settling in my chest. The truth, once exposed, had indeed twisted into something far beyond a simple murder investigation. It had become a stark revelation of ambition, a chilling testament to how easily groundbreaking discovery could be perverted into a tool of control. The prize I'd glimpsed, the very thing Thorne had died protecting, was now under lock and key, its potential for misuse temporarily neutralized. But the memory of its existence, the terrifying implications of its power, clung to me like a persistent scent. The lead detective, a man whose face was a roadmap of past cases, had closed the file a week ago. The colleague, the one who had worked closest with Thorne, whose corporate ambitions had eclipsed any semblance of loyalty or ethics, was now facing the full weight of the law. The motive had been as old as time, power. The means, however, had been terrifyingly modern, leveraging Thorne's own genius against him. It wasn't just a simple struggle for intellectual property, it was a calculated maneuver to seize control of a technology that could redefine everything. That final, microscopic trace I'd found, the unusual burn pattern, they had been the threads that unraveled a tapestry of deceit woven with scientific precision. My gaze drifted to a shelf where a sealed evidence box bore Thorne's name. Inside, a single, innocuous data chip. It contained a backup of his research, a digital ghost of his final project, now carefully catalogued and secured. The official narrative was tidy, a disgruntled collaborator, a desperate act to steal a revolutionary discovery. But I knew it was more. It was a collision of scientific ethics with unchecked greed, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge, untethered from moral anchors, could become a destructive force. Every case leaves its mark, a subtle shift in perspective, a new shade added to the palette of human depravity I've grown accustomed to observing. But Thorne's case felt different. It wasn't just a life extinguished, it was the potential of a future hijacked. The thought of that technology, whatever its ultimate application, falling into the wrong hands sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool temperature of the room. I thought of the sleepless nights, the hours hunched over a microscope, the relentless pursuit of that single, contradictory detail. Each minute had been a choice, a conscious decision to push past the easy answers, to peel back the layers until the uncomfortable truth lay exposed. The toll was undeniable. I saw the shadow of potential misuse in every new scientific breakthrough announced on the news, a constant, nagging awareness of the precipice humanity teetering on. But with that toll came a fierce reaffirmation. This was why I did what I did. Not just to solve murders, but to bear witness, to ensure that the facts, no matter how inconvenient or dangerous, were brought to light. Someone had to stand in the gap, to sift through the wreckage of human ambition and find the truth. My commitment wasn't just to the dead, but to the living, to the fragile balance between progress and peril. I turned from the locker, the metallic tang of the air filling my lungs. Thorne's case was closed, its physical evidence shelved, its perpetrator apprehended. Justice, in its slow and imperfect way, had been served. Yet, the profound questions it had unearthed, the ethical quagmire of scientific advancement, remained. They were not confined to this basement, nor to the sterile confines of a research lab. They echoed in every new discovery, every leap forward, a constant challenge to our collective moral compass. As I walked towards the exit, the faint glow of my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. A message from the chief administrator. A new file, urgent, demanding immediate attention. The subject line read, Incident at Sector 7 Grid Station, Unexplained Structural Failure. My thumb hovered over the notification. Another mystery, another set of fragments waiting to be pieced together. The tension, ever present, tightened its grip. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the struggle between progress and peril was far from over. I unlocked the phone.